Meeting call to order, and we'll begin the meeting with a moment of silence. We can pray, meditate, or just enjoy a moment of silence to yourself. Thank you. If you'll join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Oh, thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I don't believe we have anybody signed up for public comment, but is there anybody that wishes to speak? Okay, seeing none. Moving on to approval of the minutes. Council, are any corrections, additions, or deletions to the minutes presented? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
So moved.
We have a motion to approve the minutes as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
There we go. Motion carries. Are any updates from council? Okay, no updates from council. Moving on to the consent agenda. Are any questions, comments, concerns related to any item on the consent agenda?
If I could just mention something real quick, Mayor,
Sure.
Council. We added the budget amendment to cover the difference for the purchase of the camera system on a 10-year lease period. So you've got a copy of the budget amendment, additional monies that need to be appropriated for that beyond what was already appropriated in the current fiscal year.
We heard a bit about that last week. Are any questions on that item? Okay, do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
We have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, moving on to the selection of the candidate for the vacancy on the ABC board. I have these ballots for you all, council, John Brandon Olson and Meg L. Rostall. Take one, pass it to Keith. And is there any discussion before we vote?
How is Trevor going to vote?
I have Trevor's vote.
Oh, okay.
You voted this morning. Consent agenda.
If there's no discussion, you all can go ahead and vote. And when you're done, just pass it down to me. You don't have to put your name on it. Okay. We have 3 votes for John Brandon Olson and 1 vote for Meg L. Rostall. So I'll take a motion to appoint John Brandon Olson to the ABC board.
So moved.
We have a motion to appoint John Brandon Olson to the ABC board. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Congratulations, Mr. Olson.
Congratulations, Chief.
Moving on to the public hearing and presentation for this year's budget ordinance. Mr. Manager, you have a presentation, and then we're all at the public hearing, and then we'll
I
vote.
do. Let me just bring this up here, and I think we should be good to go. There we go. So, in addition to what I've got here in the presentation, you have on the dais a version, and this is because of the discussion about the amount of appropriations to go towards Fletcher Fire and Rescue. You've got a revenue spreadsheet, 3 different versions of this, and then behind each version of the revenue spreadsheet is a budget ordinance that has the total amount of appropriations and then the amount that would go to Fletcher Fire and Rescue and the other, and Mills River Fire and Rescue. So you've got that there, and it's got the title at the top of the revenue spreadsheet, how much is 9.5, how much is 10, and then how much is 10.5. And then each amount, that difference that's needed more from the 9.5 is added to appropriated fund balance at the bottom. So I could talk a little bit more about that if you have any specific questions.
So where are the figures for the fire department?
If you go into the budget ordinance, so behind the revenue spreadsheet,
Right,
if you go to the second page of the budget ordinance,
right.
and then you go down to Fletcher Fire and Rescue under Public Safety, there's the total amount. So public
Gotcha.
safety, yeah.
Gotcha.
Yep. And I can run through each one of these when you get to it, and if you need to discuss or deliberate on that.
And do you have off the top of your head what the value was last year?
The, well, the amount of appropriations?
Right, for the
Yeah.
fire department?
Yes, hold on just a sec, I think I've got that. I brought a copy of the budget request, their full budget request. Have that here. It should have the prior year in there. Give it just a second. Yeah, you've got that, yeah. Keith's got it in the binder there, but I brought my hard copy with, I'm sorry. Oh, it's at the top, it's in that folder here. Okay, so for current fiscal year, not what the one that you're discussing to approve
Right.
for next year. They were at current fiscal year, $1,505,975. So their request, and they usually get, in addition to that 1.5 million, we typically have underbilled, and we do that auditing thing, and they receive additional revenues. It could be anywhere from 25 to 50,000 more. So it's usually a little bit more than that, because we go just based on billed, and then we do an audit for how much is collected.
Right.
The amount that they're requesting in new revenues is $327,200, and that's based on 10.5 cents of what the new projected value is. And the county portion of the increase, if they, well, that's already been approved at 10.5 cents for the county, is $308,361. And again, that's an estimate based on the projections at this point from the tax assessor's office. Usually winds up being a little bit more because they go so conservative on their estimates. It's typically wind up billing more than this. But it's pretty close.
Thank you.
So I don't know if there's any other questions on that. I'll start going into the slides here to give you an overview. And again, what we've got here is a higher level view or more condensed version of the proposed budget. So, back in March, you had the full budget requests from the department heads. And then in May, I presented the recommended budget with a lot more detail in there, so, line item details and things. If the public's interested in any of the line item detail, we keep that. We do a bound budget document that's got the budget message, the ordinance, and all the line item detail on a revenue spreadsheet. So all that information's in there. So I guess unless you have any questions about that. And then one other point before I go into here. So we're required to advertise at least 10 days in advance of the public hearing, which we've done the end of May. And then we've had the draft budget available for public comment and review during that time. And I don't think we had anybody come in, Christine, right, to look at it.
Not that I'm aware of. I
Okay.
gave copies to Katie and Susan in case somebody did not wasn't here.
I don't think we had anyone come in and look at it or request it. So without any further ado, I'll move through the presentation here, which again is some just higher level view snippets or highlights of it. So as far as some highlights, again, the new total recommended budget, and this is again based on a 9.5 cents of our rate going towards Fletcher Fire and Rescue, is $9,350,734. And it's a moderate increase from our prior year budget of $8,651,437. Most of our increase in revenues here are happening from sales tax, which we've got good, robust sales tax estimates. And then, of course, property tax projections. Reval played a part on that, or revaluation, where the county goes through a process of revaluing all real properties in the county. And they do that, of course, for Fletcher, since we're a part of Henderson County. The tax rate, after looking through all this and receiving feedback from council and others, the proposed tax rate in this budget is a rate close to revenue neutral. It's not exactly at it, but it's 28 cents. So our current year tax rate, the one we're fiscal year in right now, is 34 cents. This would go down to 28 cents, which is very close to 27.7 cents is the revenue neutral calculation. So at 28 cents, it produces $4.9 million in tax levy. The new valuation or total valuation of all sources of our ad valorem property tax is estimated at $1,769,970,000. So that overall increase in our ad valorem tax base is a 24.5% increase. The portion that was from real property values, which is what the information out there in people's individual properties, that was about a 43% increase. But there's 4 different parts of that property tax space. You got real property values, you've got personal property, which is business and individual, then public service, and then motor vehicles. And that personal property portion, that we have right now, we have a negative projection on it. And that's probably most likely 2 things. Depreciation on machinery and equipment with our businesses, and then also Continental, we really have a net decrease in the values there, because it was a pretty sizable portion of business, personal, and real from the former Continental operations. So it's going to take a little time to build that back as they get other tenants into that site. So that's the total valuation overall for ad valorem. And then our sales tax estimates, they increased fairly significantly again. Our consumer spending is still real strong, so it was a 17% increase from the prior year. So that sales tax and that property tax values And even with us lowering our rate from 34 to 28 cents, if you approve that tonight, provides enough revenue there to work at that it gives us some good tools to try and fund the things that are priorities. So as far as highlights on the expense side, not a lot on the personnel. We had some additional part-time assistance that's funded in here for the police department and Parks and Rec. On the police department side, it's part-time assistance within our evidence room and some training needs, contractual training needs. And then on the Parks and Rec side, it's to help fund a middle school component of the summer day camp. And those are temp positions that go away in the summer. As far as cost of living adjustments, it's a 4% cost of living adjustment, and then also merit pay for those who qualify through the performance evaluation process. We do have a pay and classification study included in here, and that's to make sure our pay is within market, but also look that positions are properly classified as what they're doing versus what the position says it is. So that's in here. We have a minor increase for our health insurance premium, thankfully. It's only 5.2% increase in premiums without any changes to our plan for the employees. Some inflationary factors are weighing a large part on an increase in our contract for recycling services. So that played a part in a fairly significant increase. We went from a household fee of $3.07 per household monthly to $4.25, and that's still within the market for residential curbside recycling services. But we did a new 5-year contract, and that had an impact on expense. Some other highlights, and this is getting into the capital side. So we fund a lot of capital items, or a fair number of them in here, through our operating budget and also the capital improvement plan. The capital improvement plans for those larger capital purchases that are typically above a $25,000 threshold. So on the operating side of capital items, Public Works is getting a utility train vehicle, a dump bed insert, and security upgrades for Town Hall. Also on the operating side, Parks and Rec is getting would be getting purchasing a utility vehicle and mower. And then IT, or information technology, would be installing a Microsoft Security Cloud Services update, a server and network switches, and that's a replacement at Town Hall, and then agenda and meeting management software. Then going into that CIP, or capital improvement plan side, which is those larger capital purchases that we try and plan for over a 5-year period. We're going into year 3 of our capital improvement plan, and we fund it with a portion of our property tax base. It's typically been 8.5 cents of our rate. This year, we're recommending 7 cents of that 28-cent rate be dedicated to CIP. And why the drop from 8.5 to 7? Well, with reval happening and that significantly lowering our tax rate, that was one place, I felt in going through this and discussing it with you, we could save some of the expense reduction and not, hurt the other things that we're trying to fund within the operating budget and CIP. So 7 cents of our 28-cent rate for year 3 of CIP. 5 of that 7 cents is dedicated to projects supported by debt. And then the other 2 cents of that 7 cents are projects that are supported by cash or pay-as-you-go type projects. So what's funded on that debt service and pay-as-you-go or cash side? On the debt service, we have 4 projects that are funded. One is the town hall improvements, so it's our ongoing debt obligations here for the purchase of town hall, the acquisition of the property to the north, and then the reconstruction of Old Cane Creek Road that was under that project 8 years ago now. Our Highway 25 land acquisition, which is associated with the town center project on the part of the property on Highway 25. A garbage or refuse truck, which will be in year 2, and then the following year will be the last year of payment. And then copier release payments we had to include as a GASB accounting requirement. On the cash side, or pay-as-you-go, we have 3 projects. One of them is our ongoing police car rotation, so 3 cars. 3 police patrol vehicles we try and rotate out. It can be other vehicles within the police department than just patrol, but it's 3 patrol cars rotated in as new ones. Public Works utility tractor with attachments, and then a Parks and Rec maintenance truck. So those are all our projects within the annual CIP. And then next, I was going to go into just some kind of charts here that are comparison and kind of where's the money going to, and comparing it last year to this year. So that first bar chart there is looking at that blue color on the left is prior or the current year, and then the new year is that kind of red or magenta on the right. And kind of probably the highlights in here, probably the biggest jump is for the police department, and partly that is that one big purchase for the body-worn camera and in-car camera that's integrated system. And then next is Public Works, and a lot of that is the security upgrades. And the other thing I want to point out here comparison-wise, if you look at the CIP, we have a drop, and that's because we're dedicating less of the property tax rate from that 28 cents towards CIP projects. And then the other things are just very moderate increases to hardly any increase. There was some we have where the departmental went down, in fact. Next slide is kind of an exploded pie chart, trying to show where, as a little more graphically here, where's the money going on the expense side. So this kind of pinkish or mauve colored one down here that's police, yellow's fire, so you can see how much public safety, and then CIP over into that kind of off pink color, then that blue, Public Works, then admin up in here, and then Parks and Rec over into this color. It's kind of a off blue. So that gives you an idea just kind of expense-wise among the departments and kind of that piece of the pie. And then some expenditure categories. We've got 4 categories here: general government, public safety, and public works and facilities and CIP. So you can see the biggest one here is public safety, and that's police and fire. The next, kind of that upper right piece there is general government, and that's including, governing board, admin, Parks and Rec, planning and zoning, professional services. So there's a lot within there that are some departments that are general service provision. And then this kind of aqua colored one over here is CIP, and then public works down that last piece there. And if you want to see that graphically by those general expenditure categories, on a bar chart here, you can see general government, again, public safety, that really biggest part, public works, facilities, and then down to CIP. So that's kind of a quick snapshot of everything that's recommended to be funded here in this FY 2023, 2024 budget, or spending plan, I like to call it. Since sometimes you got to make adjustments during the year, and we project revenues and we project expenses and make decisions on what to fund. So that's kind of the conclusion of the budget presentation. And, next part is if you consider adopting, but I know we have kind of an outstanding issue here for discussion on what portion of that property tax rate you want to designate towards Fletcher Farm and Rescue. I think you're all comfortable with the 10 cents, since it's a very small amount to Mills River Farm and Rescue for that one parcel.
Well, we don't have a choice with that one.
Yeah, and really the contract speaks a little more specifically to what the county's doing, but you guys decide per your contract on the Fletcher Farm and Rescue side. And again, the county approved it at 10.5 cents. And that is their request, the fire department's request.
Do we have thoughts on the tax rate for the fire department? I still kind of feel comfortable at 9.5 cents.
I could go with 9.5 or 10, but I sure can't go up to 10.5. Still, even at 9.5, it's over $164,000 increase.
Yeah. So my position is 9.5 cents. Any other thoughts?
I'm good with even splitting the difference between going to 10 cents,
So
since the county's going to 10.5.
I'm not quite sure what he said.
You would rather
Split.
split the difference and do 10, not the 10.5 or the 9.5, but the 10. Is that correct, Trevor?
Yes, that's correct. That will split the difference with what the county's actually giving back to Fletcher, since they're going 10.5.
Yes,
I could live with 10 cents as well, but still my position is 9.5. But I wouldn't have a problem if you all wanted to do 10.
Ten is a $251,000 increase.
It just sounds like a lot to me.
It does.
I wish that there was a way that we could put a stipulation on that went straight to fireman salaries and certain needs. But I don't think you can do that.
No.
No.
Do that. We don't even have enough board representation to make sure that happens either.
Right.
I mean, you can convey it, you just can't stipulate that.
Hey, Mark, I think Trevor got back in the waiting room.
Oh,
By the way, I'm
okay.
sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
You there, Trevor?
No, I was just.
Sorry, I don't know why you keep getting bumped out here.
But yeah, I wish there was
Okay, thanks.
a way to do a stipulation as
Sorry
well,
about
but we
that.
just don't have the teeth to do that. Councilmember Reed, do you have a position?
It just all seems like a lot of money to me, but in the scheme of things, it's the way inflation's growing and everything else, it's, even though it seems like a lot, that money doesn't stretch as far as you think it would. I think I'm comfortable with the 10.
Okay, it sounds like to me we all are comfortable with the 10-cent rate.
I couldn't understand what Trevor was saying.
I think he said he would be okay with splitting the difference at the
okay.
10 cents.
Yes.
Is that what you heard?
That's what
He keeps
I-
getting bumped out here. Hold on a second. He's back in. He's, okay. Trevor's back now. Trevor, were you, I don't know if you just want to reconvey or confirm that you were comfortable with the 10 cents, is that, or your preference?
I'm comfortable with 10 cents myself. This is whatever council also agrees to. I'm good with the whatever they decide.
Got that?
No.
Oh, I heard 10 cents. You're comfortable with it, and you said depending on what the rest of council decides, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Sounds like we're comfortable with 10 cents then? Okay, and we will enter the public hearing. If I have a motion to enter the public hearing for the, or do you have more discussion before?
I did not. I had a question about the CIP. When we drop it down to the new values, how close to that is that similar to what it was before? Or, I mean, it looks like we're knocking it down quite a bit.
You are, but the thing that offsets it is you have so much, it's producing so much more tax levy or revenue because the value's jumped up so high. So like when I went through all the recommended projects,
Right.
and we're pulling it from the CIP plan, you still had a surplus of revenue in there versus the projects that were requested, what they cost. So there was like over 100,000 additional revenue in there that, potentially goes to reserves. So that, it does help to offset, depending how you end at the end of the fiscal year, meaning how we spend
Right.
overall and how much revenue comes in. If that's pretty, close, or we're under on expense or more than projected revenues, you should have enough of a gap to help absorb this. And I realize this is operating expense, and if you keep it at 10 cents the following year, you got to meet that operating expense. There's not a lot of one-time, but you do have the space in here, and you do have, like speaking to some of the other capital items. I don't anticipate anything large, but I don't have a crystal ball. I mean, there could be
Right.
something that happens between now and next year, but I don't anticipate any really large capital expense requests that would either have to be amended in the CIP or a bunch of big things out of the operating budget. So you'll probably see a drop in our base a little bit, in particular like the body worn camera and car camera
Right.
system, because that's like $235,000. So that had a big impact. The security grade, or security system upgrades, physical upgrades in town hall, that was a big, that was $60,000. So that helps to, mitigate some things. So you do have that. You have
Yeah.
surplus in CIP in this current year.
I'm a little bit leery about making big changes to the CIP because that's the fund that keeps Fletcher moving forward.
Sure.
And if we start hacking away too much at that, the town's going to start stagnating, and I don't want to see that either. But, I mean, we can review it again next year and see how it works out.
Yeah, and we can see what projected revenues are based on property tax base. And if you feel we need to, adjust it up or try and get it back towards the 8.5 cents,
Right.
which is what we've been doing for years as part of the kind of policy, you can consider doing that. But I would just caution to see what the revenue projections look like next year,
Yeah.
and we plug it in and see.
Because we have such a strong reserve.
Yeah, our reserves are
Yeah,
very
that's what I'm
strong
saying.
right now.
Don't look
It's-
on the tax dollar.
Right.
Left out.
Yeah, now you don't want to, on an annual basis, be passing an operating budget that uses lots of reserves.
Right.
Because then at some point you're paying the piper on that,
Yeah.
and it's not a good, but this is still in a reasonable, very reasonable range
Okay.
for us to be able to
Fine
handle.
with me.
And we got hit so hard with county taxes.
Yes, we did.
Alrighty, any other questions, comments, concerns? Seeing none, do we have a motion to enter the public hearing for budget ordinance number 0-23-07?
I make the motion.
We have a motion to enter public hearing. Do we have a second?
Second.
A motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of entering the public hearing say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? We're in public hearing. I don't think anybody signed up. Is there anybody that wishes to speak during the public hearing? Okay. Seeing none, do we have a motion to close the public hearing?
I'll make the motion.
There's a motion to close the public hearing. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of closing the public hearing say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? We're out the public hearing. We're ready to approve the budget ordinance. Well, Madam Clerk, let me ask you a question. When we make this motion, do you want to specify with the fire tax rate?
Please.
Okay. Was there a motion to approve budget ordinance number 023-07 or Fletcher Fire and Rescue budget at a 10 cents rate?
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Or a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the budget say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. And I want to thank council and staff and the public for being so engaged in this process. It's always a process. So thank you all. Yeah.
That'll at least get it on the record a little bit.
Yeah. Sorry.
And I'll probably, Mayor, Council, I'll probably update our budget message. Sometimes I don't because it doesn't really significantly change from what, so I put a budget message out after the recommended budget is presented in May. But this is a little more substantive change that,
Sure.
that you've made. So we may revise that and put a slightly newer or just updated version of it up for on the website.
Thank you for working on that, Mr. Manager. All righty, going on to item number 6, the presentation of a draft traffic calming policy. We had this presentation last week. I believe I have a new updated policy with the removal of the neighborhood contribution rate. Is that correct, Mr. Manager?
That's correct.
Okay. And maybe for the benefit of public members that weren't here last week, maybe just go through the Spark Notes version.
Sure. I tried to condense this down, and I have a little, and actually this revised document might be good for anyone who does come and request a copy of it for the public, but, and we can also always provide the full policy, because it's got pictures and the toolbox and all that in it. But, so essentially, this is in follow-up to a lot of discussion about the traffic calming policy, and it is a tool to kind of vet these requests that we get from the public from time to time from neighborhoods about, you know, people cutting through, or it's usually speeding, and the speeding part is what drives that initial request. And remember, this is a policy, if you had to deviate from it due to specific circumstances, you can, but it provides a good way to vet these concerns that come to staff and then to council. So we can try and take some steps to improve it without necessarily going through this whole policy, which gets into making physical improvements in neighborhoods that can become quite costly and impactful, because sometimes some residents aren't as, may not want some of these things
Right.
in there. So the speed humps or speed tables might be an example of that. And it also gives a lot of opportunities to, like I said, vet or try to address some of these things so it doesn't have to go quite that far. So I'll run through quickly the steps. And basically it starts with a resident can bring a request based on complaining of speeding. They can be saying there's a higher traffic volume. There's other issues they want to be addressed beyond just, hey, check out speeding on, you know, Clover Drive. So that comes to council. you have to decide then if you think it has merit to have our police department check that out or kind of investigate it. So then that next step goes to our chief and the police department. They look at accident history in the neighborhood. They look at citations that have been issued, do some increased speed enforcement, maybe put speed trailer out there. You know that we also have our own traffic counting information, so we can take data on traffic volumes and speeds. So it's kind of that initial, the police department looks at it, takes some of these initial steps, because that could address the situation there. And then come back to that report with you all, and if you feel that's adequately addressed it, then it kind of can end there. If not, and you feel it needs more review, then it goes into this kind of second part of the analysis where a resident can then petition council to say, yes, we want additional review of the issues there. And then they have to do a request for traffic calming petition. And then that petition requires at least 10 signatures from people in the affected area. So once they get that signatures, you check the validity. Then we look at some additional data collection, and then to see does it kind of cross that threshold to need additional review, maybe potentially get into actual physical improvements in the neighborhood. So then they look at data collection that includes daily traffic volume counts, the length of the street, the grade, nothing more than an 8% grade, and then if the potential traffic calming measures that would be put in, they don't conflict with proper sight distance. But kind of the real kicker here in this additional phase of data collection is if there's not 600 vehicles a day moving through there, or a peak traffic volume of 100 vehicles a day at peak traffic times, that could kick it out. The street that's being looked at is not at least 1,000 feet or approximately 1,000 feet. That can kick it out. The grade, and then the potential improvements if it hurts sight distance. So after we look through that, then they determine if it meets those thresholds, then it goes to kind of the next step of additional information that's gathered. If not, the petition is denied at that point. So if those guidelines that I just mentioned about the volumes, length of the street, et cetera, are met, it goes on. If it doesn't, it stops. Then the next step, in step 3, is a prioritization. They're looking at traffic speeds and how much are above the 85th percentile, looking at pedestrian activity in the neighborhood, crash history, and then traffic volumes and sidewalks, if there's sidewalks available. And it goes into a point system, and some of this point system is if you have multiple projects that are coming in where people are vying for potential improvements. So then after that, it goes to a neighborhood stakeholder meeting where you share some of that initial data, talk about what might be some potential traffic calming measures. They talk about a toolbox of different things that could be used, which could be street signage, traffic humps or traffic tables, speed tables, excuse me, line striping, changes in parking requirements, all the way up into some other things that are more horizontal in nature. And that's the toolbox. And then the next thing is a report back to the neighborhood of what might be some of these potential recommendations from that toolbox, the traffic improvements, and then what the costs might be and a timetable for installation. And then from there, there's final step 7 is you put together what that recommended plan is, give the neighborhood another opportunity for feedback, talk about a timeline, costs, all of that. And then if you got to determine, based on what this recommendation of these improvements are, 80% of the affected property owners in the neighborhood in that affected area have to sign off on it. So there's an 80% threshold there. then
And that would be like a mailed out
Yeah.
questionnaire
yeah.
to make sure everybody gets it.
Right. There's a voting document in the traffic, in the complete policy there, and the petitions in there. And then we got to make sure, one vote per those households.
Right.
Yep. And then after that, if we put the improvements in, you're supposed to wait at least 2 years to evaluate them. You could pull them out or change it sooner based on council's input, or the property or the neighborhood could petition to have
Right.
it taken, but you just wait 2 years. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, how this works. There is a lot of steps. It's purposely set up that way. We looked at other traffic calming policies, and usually there's a bunch of, hey, they bring the request, they check it out, see if there's some, lower level enforcement things that they can do, analysis, then it's a little bit heavier data gathering to see does it meet that threshold, if it maybe needs more, if it doesn't, if it dies, if it does, then you get into, okay, well, here's some potential things we could do and get the neighborhood really involved in
Right.
it. So and then they have to vote. If you get to that point, you have to get at least 80% there. It's a little bit involved, but it does provide a method, it does provide some tools, and it does help to vet some of these things out that come before, staff and then council. So,
I think it's a good idea. I mean, you can hand it to people and it gives them a better idea of where they have to go.
yep,
It gives us clarity too.
Right.
yep. So, I would suggest that if you're comfortable tonight, and if you need more time to look at it, that's fine. You approve it, and that'll kind of be our accepted policy, would be our policy to use. And, I mean, you can deviate if you need to in something in there. You're not, bound to do everything to the T in there, but it does give some good structure for it. So I would just ask if you're comfortable to consider adoption on it.
Are there any other questions or comments? Is everybody comfortable with the policy and everybody is comfortable?
Yep.
Can we have a motion to approve the traffic calming policy presented?
I'll make the motion.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the traffic calming policy. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we'll say Councilmember Franklin beat him for the second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the policy, aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. And moving on to your comments, Mr. Manager.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Last week I'd mentioned some of our project over at Billmore Community Park, the tennis, basketball, and pickleball courts. That's moving along. We've had a couple of change order issues. You knew about the drainage one. And then we've also had a issue when they're doing the undercut and fill. It needed some additional beyond what they had estimated, so they can get that proper compaction. If you've been by there, you can see they're putting that base down right now
Right.
and getting into the asphalt. So that's, right now it's moving along fine, so just want to let you know about that. The actuated flasher signal at Hooper's Creek and Wildbriar Road, so this is a public safety improvement that was funded by the state through contingency funds from our legislators. That's finally up and operational. If you haven't been by there to see it, I encourage you to do it. I think it looks good.
Yeah, it does.
I think it should help with road safety there, in particular for the residents coming in and out of the cove at Livingston Farms, and people, just driving down Hooper's Creek Road. I mentioned last week our developer response on the town center traffic impact analysis. So our former developer of record has kind of officially backed out of the project. And the reason is they did some additional data analysis of the volume of left traffic movement coming into their other stores. And why that? Because the mitigation stuff that DOT wants them to do restricts left turn movement from Highway 25 into the middle of the site. So, I will say I did talk to, and Eric and I are putting the feelers out right now to other developer interests, which we know have interest in the property. I did talk to Martin Lewis of Lewis Real Estate Group, which is one of the former developer of record with the Waddells. And he really indicated to me if that left turning movement was out, that they were ready to go. If it wasn't completely restricted. So, I don't know if it's worth going back to DOT. I would just say Eric and I are going to meet with him on this Wednesday to just get their other thoughts on challenges, pros to doing the development as they had proposed to us and had under contract, and get that feedback. See, maybe it's worth having a conversation with DOT about would there be something they would change in the scheme of these mitigation improvements that have to be made. Eric and I also want to talk to them about, taking a shot at it without the convenience store component. And, is there another way to underwrite the cost? Part of that was to help underwrite the cost of the overall development of the project. Is there another way to do that without it? So we're talking to Magnolia Properties and some others, and I'll come back probably at the July meeting. It depends how much information we have. Maybe talk about a little more detailed report of kind of what your options might be, or what some options you might want to consider going forward based on where we're at. We also want to, Eric and I also want to feel out Martin Lewis about kind of the development industry right now, kind of where we're at in the economy and other projects, and timing wise, does it make sense to try and go to an RFP or just try and work on negotiations with individual groups? So those are just some thoughts on kind of where we're at.
At what point should we put a new for sale sign up there?
I don't, maybe that helps to generate interest, but it's kind of like the people around here that know that that's available know. The major players, the Pulliam property, I'm not going to name them all,
Yeah.
but the Pulliam properties, the Magnolia that's getting active in this area. They got a really neat food hall project that's right across the street from it. Martin Lewis and what else? Name another one. Biltmore development. So Biltmore Village or Biltmore, whatever the proper name for the Biltmore development industry. So they kind of all know, and we'll reach out to them. I don't know if putting a sign. That's one option, something to think about, just to keep generating interest. But people are asking. They're obviously curious what's going to happen. Why is it not happening fast enough? They've noticed that it's cleared the site, so we did get that done. When Magnolia, they sent us back an email this week, and it was fairly detailed comments, analysis on the properties. I know they were looking at it fairly. There's three things they brought up. The railroad right away. Sometimes that scares away national tenants if they know you have to pull up improvements if you encroach in the railroad right away. So getting that resolved, which we think we can, because we checked that out fairly. heavily with the Waddells and Lewis Real Estate Group. So that was one. The value, the cost on the property, they feel like some of these traffic mitigation requirements should lower the asking price, basically, like updating the value, property valuation on it. Sorry, the term's escaping me right now, but basically an updated price analysis on those things should go into lowering the price. And then they had some comments about limitations on that kind of the topography of the site and building it into the grade. Again, we can't really comment. They need to give us, okay, we can do 3 commercial buildings that'll have this types of uses on this location. Then we can speak to that a little. So Eric and I are trying to flush that out with Zach Brogan from Magnolia. But I know they've taken a really hard look at it. And they may be waiting. You know, timing is huge. If once this food hall is built out, and then you get to seeing how that's doing, the activity, it increases the value and the things that you can do across the street on
Right.
town-owned property. So I don't know.
But it also makes that property, gives it more value too.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well,
price could go up.
I didn't necessarily agree with all the points they were making in
No.
there about the challenges of building on the property, and now that we know what the traffic impact analysis said and all these mitigation stuff that we have to do, that lowers the value. I don't think property valuation companies, they don't look at that.
Yeah.
Or they might somewhere in there. I don't seem to see that in their determination. So,
But there again, I mean, you have to look at all the work that went into getting all those pieces into one big piece, and that, to me, that should increase the value substantially too. I mean, that's a lot of work that somebody else won't have to do.
We just had reval done, and we know how much property was, like an average about 43% for Fletcher. So I mean, the chances that it's less are probably not very good. It's if not anything else, maybe worst case, a marginal increase. But also keep in mind, we're trying to develop this for a mixed use
Right.
project, not trying to
Just dump
make
it.
dump it and make a lot of money and flip it. Yeah, that's great. We pay off the debt, but then what have we done with the property to enhance what we're trying to do for downtown development? Really nothing.
And luckily, we're in a position right now that we don't have to sell it
Nope.
right away.
Yeah. We financially, it's not a drain to hold on to that right now. But, the bigger thing is a good public-private partnership for mixed-use development.
Right.
There's probably going to have to be, public contribution, like we did the $150,000 we were willing to do for the road construction. I mean, that just helps them to get their numbers in to do something that we want them to do in there versus just letting the market do
Right.
whatever it wants. So that's kind of the give and take on it. So, and that's what's happening. If you have any other questions, let me know. Last thing I wanted to mention, 2 more things, second last. The DOT meeting, I emailed you all. Sheila was at that, and Mayor was at that today. This is about the sound walls on I-26. And I thought it went well. We had a bunch of residents that turned out here from Wildwood, and they asked lots of good questions, had some good comments. It is funded right now. There is a second step that still has to happen, and it's a very important one that involves engagement with the affected property owners. So I shared a map, and they try and like map out these areas of the ones who'd be most impacted where this proposed sound wall would go. And they have to vote, like an affirmative vote. I don't know what that threshold percentage is. We didn't get that from them today, but basically, the assumption is that most, if not everybody's going to say yes on this. And then with that would probably go out in August, and we'll try and help get the word out once we know definitively who these. It's on a map there right now, but that could be adjusted. I think.
So did they provide a map of where they think it's supposed to go?
Yes.
In other words, I assume it's going pretty much from the rest area. Is it going to include the church?
No, it stops right at the church.
Okay.
But it covers kind of that whole residential
Right.
area of Wildwood, and I think it does stop at the rest stop, if I remember right, or close to
Yeah,
it.
I mean, the
close to
houses
it.
are right up there.
Yeah. So,
I think they said the church
it's-
served as a barrier as well, essentially,
yeah,
for sound.
yeah, the church does. So it's a purple line on the map I sent to you, and I can get a hard
Send
copy.
an email, I just send it to you, Bob.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So, it's funded. They do have to do an affirmative vote for these certain color-coded dots where these properties are. If they get that, then it goes pretty quickly to design and construction. Hopefully, if that goes as smoothly, it could be as soon as November for them to, I think, start on construction or finish design, start on construction. So they're in that September, November timeframe. So that'd be good. Good news. That's moving forward. Big thank you to DOT, and I know Representative Bauckham had helped, and
Chuck
Senator
helped.
Moffett, yeah, and Chuck McGrady, our DOT board rep. Chuck McGrady was on the call today, and then these other DOT consultants. It was on a Teams meeting here, kind of like we got Zoom going on now. So, and last thing I was going to mention, fiscal year closeout meeting. We typically do one at the end of June. And with the 28th or 29th, either of those dates, are there any conflicts? You still on there, Trevor?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. So I was just mentioning, if you heard that right, the 28th or 29th of this month is a potential special call meeting for fiscal year closeout.
I may have to join back in the Zoom if that's okay. I'll be in Nebraska.
So you'll be out then, but out of town.
Yes, I can join in on Zoom again, but I'll be in Nebraska.
Okay.
So again, evening,
That was gonna be
This
mine.
could probably be in the afternoon.
If it's the afternoon, I would prefer the 29th.
Okay.
I'm okay with either day
Like,
if it's in the
I
afternoon.
mean, we can do it, and this is for our people, working full-time jobs during the day, like 4 o'clock. Is that
Is
Is
that
that-
appropriate for everybody? That would work for me.
work?
29th.
Okay, so 29th at 4.
So we're going ahead and just schedule it for that?
Yeah, we'll go ahead and get the notice out. It's got to be set by the mayor for authorization for the special call. Okay. And that's all I had.
All right, that brings us to the end of our agenda. I know, Bob, you had one item you wanted to
Yeah,
mention.
I just wanted to remind people, both on the board as well as the general public, that, well, first of all, let me ask you, Mark, have you heard anything more about the legislation trying to change the election dates? I've not heard anything, but if I've gone to the,
Well, I think it passed the Senate side, and I think it's in committee.
but it
on the House
can't
side, if I'm not
happen. I
mistaken.
mean,
Outside.
you're talking 4 weeks away.
I agree. I don't,
If you go to the Board of Elections website, it makes no mention of that.
It may
And
not-
it shows the dates that are coming up.
It may not clear.
Yeah.
It may be worthwhile talking to our state delegation to see if they think it's gonna pass in time or not.
And I believe this time, it's what, myself and Keith that are up?
Right.
Yes, that's right.
And that open period is July 7th through July 21st. And I'm not going to be running, so hopefully some people will step up and want to run.
I'm sorry, I'm letting Trevor back in. We lost him again. Trevor, did you catch, Bob was asking about the status of that bill to change the election to municipal elections to even years instead of odd years?
I didn't catch that, no.
Did you hear what he said?
No idea.
I did not catch it.
Pardon me?
I did not, catch what Bob said, no. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's okay. He was asking if anyone knew if the bill had passed yet for changing the municipal elections from odd years to even years. It was somewhat of a controversial bill with some municipalities, or I guess it's fair to say quite a few, not liking it moving to the even year, because then it kind of dilutes the interest that gets washed into county board of elections and other offices. That's the gist of it. And if our understanding, I think it's cleared the Senate. It might be in committee right now. So I was trying to remember the next.
But that's coming up real quick. Like I was saying earlier, the registration for the next election is July 7th through July 21st, which is less than a month away. That's all I had.
We can check on, where that's at.
Go ahead, Councilmember,
I'm getting probably Thursday or next Tuesday.
for the pass.
He said it'll pass the House this week and then return to the Senate for concurrence.
That sounds like it's almost an end
Is
deal.
that from Senator Moffitt?
Yes.
We can check on the bill, go to the website, the league has that tracking one.
It sounds like it's likely going forward.
Okay.
Do we have any other business from this body? All righty. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved?
Or a motion to adjourn? Do we have a second?
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of adjourning say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? We are adjourned.